I'm joined by the former Comptroller and Auditor General of India, Vinod Rai, on his book, Rethinking Good Governance. So thank you for making time for WION.
Thank you very much for having me.
And let me begin this interview by asking you that the sense one gets after going through your book is that horizontal accountability institutions like CBI, CAG, RBI, CVC are under tremendous stress. Why?
You see, as democracy develops, as citizens come center stage, as citizens become more and more aware of their rights, and they seek a participative, kind of democracy in governance, they start questioning every action of each of these institutions. And the healthy development for India has been that institutions of vertical accountability, which are otherwise known as informal institutions, like the media, like citizens groups, like NGOs, and the institution of what has now become the public interest litigation. These have started putting more and more pressure to ensure the accountability of these horizontal institutions. And I think that's a very healthy trend.
So the trend is healthy, but, in the chapters you have described, when it comes to CBI or when it comes to RBI, when it comes to CVC, you have mentioned plethora of reasons: merit, technical expertise, constant transfer. But the moot point you raised was that the way these institutions should function are not functioning. So where has the deterioration taken place?
No, I have not at any point of time said that the way they should function, they are not functioning. What I've just said is, any public institution is not known by the architecture of the building in which it is housed. It is the capability, the acumen, and the capacity to deliver of the people who populate that institution. Now, if we have competent people, that institution will develop well. If we have autonomy of the institution and the people sitting inside are able to establish their objectivity and independence, they will deliver better. So I have come to the conclusion that we have the best of structures, and the performance of these institutions has been totally dependent upon the people, the acumen of the people who have occupied it from time to time.
So let me bring you to a subject which really puts you on the public map, which is 2G. You have addressed this issue in the book. Now, my question to you is that you were silent for a long time on this. Why did you break your silence on this issue through the book?
I have not. I've addressed this issue through the book in a very peripheral fashion. I have addressed this issue while dealing with the powers and the performance of the Supreme Court. And I brought in the cancellation of licenses by the Supreme Court in the 2G spectrum case as well as the coal allocations. And I've said that the strength of the Supreme Court is the fact that irrespective of the powers or the performance of the executive, the Supreme Court in this country has been guided entirely by the legal aspects that govern whatever is the issue before them. And that's why I have just about 2 paragraphs on the 2G and 2 paragraphs on the coal allocation saying that these were decisions taken by the executive. Whatever factors must have weighed with them. But when they were contested before the Supreme Court had no hesitation in setting aside the decision of the executive. And that's why I said it's a question of checks and balances.
So, did you feel disappointed after the verdict came in the 2G and Raja got acquitted?
Oh no, why should I? Why should I? See, his acquittal was in a trial court based on criminality, being judged by the trial court. And that was entirely an issue which was between the investigating agency and the trial court. The Supreme Court had cancelled the licenses. Before that, we had submitted our audit report to the Parliament. These 2 bodies had nothing to do with what was going on in the trial court. We conducted audit. The CAG does audit, not investigation. We prepared a report, we put it into Parliament, it was examined by the PSC. That chapter was closed. Then the Supreme Court was responding to a public interest litigation which was filed before them. And the good thing was that the Supreme Court has very clearly mentioned in its verdict that we are not basing our discussion, our deliberation on the report of the Auditor General, because that report is in Parliament before the PAC. So Supreme Court went entirely by the evidence, the witnesses, the documents that was produced before it in the court. So they took a legalistic view and they found that the licenses had not been allotted by the policy which had been laid down by the government of that time. They cancelled the licenses. That chapter got closed. Then the issue of investigation arose. So why should me or the Supreme Court, any of the judges in the Supreme Court, be disappointed because the trial court acquitted the people that the Central Bureau of Investigation had termed as accused?
And trial court saying that there's no sense of scam. People put different perspectives, things together, and there was no scam. That's part of the order.
No, part of the order is that the charge sheet, the witnesses, the statements made by the investigating agency have nothing to do with the kind of witnesses that were produced. The judge has gone on record to say that I sat from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., none of the witnesses came. And somewhere in this order he said that there was a miserable failure of the investigating agency for the evidence that they were supposed to.
This is one issue I'm going to come to you later in terms of prosecution, investigation in context of CBI, but I would like this interview to keep its focus on the issue of 2G. You have also mentioned the book, whereas you felt that the Manmohan Singh, then Prime Minister, was misinformed, advised about the CAG's role. Were you taken by surprise when he made that statement at the meeting during his interaction?
See, he was interacting with the print media. I was not in town, in fact not in the country at the time of that interaction. There was no question of being surprised about it. But when
a former bureaucrat also, because Manmohan Singh has an experience of working in the government in a different capacity, apart from just being a politician.
Absolutely. A very experienced person. He's worked in the government, he's worked in the Reserve Bank of India, and he's been the finance minister and the prime minister. Very experienced and an outstanding personality in every respect. When I saw the text of his discussions with the print media, I was a bit surprised only by that portion where he appeared to be in brief to believe that the CAG had held press conferences. Now, it's a fact that in my entire tenure of 5.5 years, I had never held a single press conference. So I felt it my duty that I need to brief my Prime Minister that this part of his entire interview, he was inadequately informed. So I wrote him a polite letter saying, sir, I saw this text and I felt that you have been inaccurately briefed. I've never held a press conference. I went on to explain to him that the CAG has a practice which was derived after discussion with the...
In the letter, you said that.
Yes, in the letter, sir. CAG has a practice which was derived after discussion with the Public Accounts Committee and the government. And I think it was sometime around 88, 89, post the Bofors kind of issues had arisen, that the practice said that once a report is put into Parliament, it becomes a public document. The CAG, officers of the CAG must hold a press briefing that evening to explain objectively as to what that report contains so that there is no misinformation in the media.
Did you ever get an acknowledgement of the letter or a response from the Prime Minister?
No, I didn't get an acknowledgement from the letter, but subsequently I had this practice of calling on the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister about once in 6 months. When I called on the Honourable Prime Minister, he mentioned that he had got the letter and that he was appreciative of the fact that this issue had been clarified to him.
Do you feel that the issue of performance audit for the CAG is now settled completely?
There's no question of it's being settled completely. The fact that the CAG has the mandate to do performance audit was undeniable. But most importantly, there is a government letter of 16 June 2006, that's much before I joined, which specifically instructs all ministries, and this is a letter issued by the Finance Ministry, which specifically instructs all ministries that the CAG is competent to do performance audit and all ministries must cooperate with the CAG for performance audits.
So do you realize that your report actually played a very important part in actually bringing down the UP and creating a demand for the Lokpal, a public movement? How do you see that in retrospect?
Two issues. One, the demand for the Lokpal has been on for about 40 years.
But it gained momentum during the same time when these figures came out.
Yes, that is the the vertical accountability I'm talking about. Public interest litigations, citizens' movements. You had people sitting in Jantar Mantar, you had people sitting at Ramlila grounds, etc. Those are the movements which had nothing to do with our report. They started earlier, they ended much later. But at the same point of time, I think it is too much of a judgmental issue or too much of an extension of the logic to say one report can bring down a government in a democracy.
Did you ever face political interference at that point of time when you were going through 2G?
I must say, to the credit of the political setup in the country, that they respect the independence and autonomy of the constitutional institutions. So at no point of time in my tenure did I ever feel that anybody was trying to interfere in the audit process of the CAG.
The campaign against you was very vociferous. So the question is, did you ever receive a phone call or a nuanced hint from any politician on this issue?
Never at all. Never at all. I mean, as you said, that there was a lot of going on in the media, print, electronic, everything. But that's part of...
So, were you surprised when Pranab Mukherjee's view came out on this issue and it differed from his peers on CAG?
No. Mr. Pranab Mukherjee has always been very supportive of the audit department. Whenever we called upon him, whenever we made presentations to him, and not only that, when he was good enough to come and address the Conference of Accountants General, he was very supportive and he said, yes, audits, the job of audit is to see if there's been any systems failure. And it's very good when you point it out, because then it helps in the upgradation of the quality of deliverance or the quality of administration.
So, when this controversy was happening, what did you make of Kapil Sibal's zero loss theory, the grand press conference which took place at Press Information Bureau?
He had a viewpoint. He expressed his viewpoint. Perfectly understandable. Perfectly understandable. He had a viewpoint. Maybe the government, maybe the department have viewpoint. He expressed it. It's fine. As far as we are concerned, how does it matter to us?
So, all the time, then you were being accused of being partisan and playing into the opposition's hand. How did you take that criticism then?
Why should I be bothered about it? If you go down in history, and I've given about half a dozen instances, starting from the Jeep scandal during T.T. Krishnamachari's time, there have been so much said about the performance, about the audits of the Comptroller and Auditor General India. I don't think any Auditor General has ever taken it askance or been in any way felt stressed by those things. Mr. Krishnan talked about it, Mr. George Fernandez talked about it. There have been so many instances.
But sir, at any point of time, did you or your agency feel affected by the political debate on this?
No,
in terms of morale?
No, not at all. That's why I said, told you that that's a strength of the audit department. They are totally apolitical. And, when they get into their audit work, they leave everything else outside and they are just not bothered about what is going on, the cacophony that is going on in public space.
So, at the point of time, your accounting method and estimation was challenged by many people. How do you feel vindicated? And where does your conviction stem from that your estimates were correct?
Okay, two things. When we put out the figures, I mentioned to you that the Audit and Accounts Department has a very rigorous system of going through the process of audit. Not only that, sir, major audits of the kind that you are talking about, there's always peer review within the department. For example, if I'm the Deputy CAG heading that department which is conducting the audit, and the issues come up to the Deputy CAG level, and it's an important audit like this one was, all the other Deputy CAGs will sit together and then debate it. And the process is very rigorous. They really go through with a fine-tooth comb in all these things. And once they clear it, it gives the Auditor General that much of confidence to be able to approve the report. That's number one. How did we feel vindicated? The very important thing was, if you recall, the Supreme Court cancelled those licenses. And 1 year later, the government had to do an auction of those licenses.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? What was the auction revenue that government derived from it? Exactly in the band that we had indicated. If you recall, we had given
3G,
figures. No. See, the 2G was auctioned. See, 2G was distributed by first come, first serve.
Absolutely.
3G was auctioned 1 year later without the CAG interfering in that. But when the 2G licenses were cancelled, the government auctioned them in sometime in 2012, if I remember correctly. Okay. And the amount realized in that auction was exactly within the band that we had pointed out. And if you remember, we had given a band of three figures, which was between 66 and about 73,000 crores. The fourth figure, which you folks picked up, was this figure of 1,76,000 crores, which had been derived extrapolating the amount the government had received from the 3G auction. And we said, if 2G had been auctioned, you would have got this much. But when the audit of the 2G was done, post the government or the Supreme Court cancelling those licenses, the amount realized was exactly what the Auditor General had pointed out. And I distinctly remember today, I still have that cutting. I think it was the Economic Times newspaper. The headline said, CAG vindicated.
Did it pan out the same way in context of the coal scam also? Because subsequently, again, they were auctioned?
In the initial period, the coal was not, there was no policy of, collecting revenue. Amounts were royalty and other things which were being received from the states. Okay, so this auction process could not be compared with that, because in that case it was not a revenue generating activity.
So when the result of the audit came out, the discourse was that somehow public servants got targeted. How do you respond to it?
I think it's very fair that the entire decision making hierarchy should be held responsible for whatever decision which went awry. Now see, decisions can go awry for two reasons. One is an act of omission, the other is an act of commission. An act of omission could be in good faith. So I think if a decision I've taken and it is proven to be a decision taken but in good faith, it has gone wrong, I think that should not be punished. A person should not be punished for that. It can happen to any one of us. We are taking decisions every other day. The other is the act of commission, where there could be an element of malfeasance. And that is where, if that has occurred, the entire hierarchy needs to be questioned for it.
Sir, you were also criticized for creating policy paralysis in the government. Can you break your silence on this issue?
See, the question of policy paralysis just doesn't arise. People who claim that there was a policy paralysis subscribe to the viewpoint, or rather, I would say that they are looking for an alibi for their non-performance. It's a bogey. You see, in government, the government has a very good practice of recording your entire opinions, recording their entire discussions on paper. Now, if you have transparently followed all the processes, and processes in government are very important, if you have followed your process and recorded the reasons, nobody has ever been punished for that. It's only when this is lacking somewhere that the penalty has been imposed. So I don't think for anybody to claim that there is a policy paralysis, it's a fair claim.
CAG didn't create policy paralysis.
Definitely, neither CAG nor the CVC nor the CBI. I think, there is an English saying which says, empty cans make more noise. It was those empty cans who, in any case, were incapable of performing, were trying to justify themselves. Look, how can we perform? These three C's are chasing us.
And in retrospect, do you feel satisfied that the position which CAG took during its audit, when you were looking at the coal allocation, that it has streamlined the policy when it comes to the precious natural resources?
I'm very happy that you raised the point. It's a very valid observation, because natural resources in the country are not unlimited. They are finite. When government hands out natural resources, there should be an element of transparency in the manner in which it is given out. And I think, especially the coal allocation, government is now following a very transparent auction or a bidding process by which it is being given out, and never has any allegation ever been raised on these issues.
But let me come back to an issue which you addressed in the earlier part of the interview. You have explained the 2G verdict in context of CBI performance in your book, in context of the prosecution. Now, you have also mentioned that there's a balance in India, at least, which is required in context of prosecution investigation. And you gave an example of Preet Bharara. And you have explained that balance is not, that balance of prosecution and investigation is not there in CBI.
I'm quoting some studies.
And so my question to you is, how is it possible to regain or gain that balance you have mentioned in the book?
Yeah. See, what I have pointed out, and it's based on certain studies, which I have also quoted in the book, that within the investigating agencies also there are two. One is investigation, the other is prosecution. Investigation is done by the agency's experienced officers. Prosecution is done by the legal arm of that agency. Now, there needs to be a certain amount of independence of the prosecution from the investigation. And prosecution should be given us freedom to be able to decide whatever they have to decide when they need to follow it, which unfortunately those studies indicate that independence is not forthcoming in the investigation at that time.
So it also got reflected in the 2G verdict in the trial court?
Maybe, because now I think, if I remember correctly, the CBI has filed an appeal.
Yes.
These things take a long time. Has filed an appeal, and I think they will be addressing that issue in the appeal, that in the coordination between the prosecution and the investigation, did anything go amiss? That they have to decide.
In context of vetting, and you said that when the questions were raised about Asthana, CVC should have actually gone into it. Can you put some light on it?
Yeah. See, what happens is, when you are appointing in the government, the procedure is, when you are appointing officers at a high level, at a critical level, at a decision-making level, you always do a background check of those officers. And I'll tell you, for example, when you and I are appointed as secretaries to Government of India, there is an IB report which is, summoned on us. At the same time, since I was in the finance ministry and looking after banking, when we appointed chairman and managing director of banks, we used to do a due diligence on them. Look at their past records, look at their performances, collect 360 kind of information upon them, because you are appointing them at a very senior position. Now, all that I'm pointing out in this is, did that kind of a scrutiny take place on both these officers? And why I'm pointing it out is because we have had a rather embarrassing situation where a CVC got appointed and there was a lacuna in the appointment which had to, Supreme Court had to interfere.
You feel that CVC failed here?
No, I'm not saying the CVC failed. I don't know whether CVC had to do the due diligence or Department of Personnel had to do it or who had to do it. That depends from institution to institution. I'm not aware. But all that I'm saying is, some point of time, that due diligence, they did not throw up the kind of allegations that.
So there was no due diligence. That's the point you're making.
Was possibly inadequate.
Do you feel that institutions like CBI, CVC, or even CAG, they need some kind of overhauling, architecture change?
No. Only in the case of the CBI, I've mentioned. CAG certainly not. CBI, I've mentioned that CBI today is being administered by an act which is called the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. They deserve to have a statute of their own that will define their accountability, their functioning, etc. much.
And which will also have to come with the operationalization of Lokpal, because then they will be working closely.
That's right.
Let me take you to an issue which you are seized of. So when you took over the administration of BCCI, what were your first thoughts?
Oh, wonderful. I've been a follower of the game. I've loved the game. I've played it. And I enjoy the game in all formats. So, I've mentioned in the book also that when I took over, I thought I'm going to be a night watchman, in the sense that for a very short stay. And I thought it was a good opportunity to ensure that a new kind of constitution is adopted by the BCCI and it gets what I would call more dynamic than what it was earlier. But unfortunately, the problem that occurred was that people who had been serving the BCCI felt that they still continued to have a longer tenure. 15 years, 20 years, they felt was not enough. And they felt that...
Not enough?
Yes, not enough. And they felt that if they'd done 20 years, so what? They were experts in cricket administration and they should allow to continue on.
Do you feel that those BCCI became subservient to the electoral politics over a period of time?
No point of time. BCCI became subservient to a group of people who were managing it over a long period of time. And that group felt that...
And they were all full-time politicians?
No. They were not all full-time politicians.
People at top were the full-time politicians?
No. There were a couple of politicians also, but most of them were not. And had risen up from various states. But the only difficulty we found was that good governance, and that's why I brought it in, a good corporate governance dictates that when you are at the top of an institution, you have a certain tenure, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years. And in fact, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has issued certain guidelines for good governance, good corporate governance. And they said that if you are in a board of directors, 3 tenures of 3 years each, roughly 9 years, is the maximum that you should be there.
Have you been able to enforce the Supreme Court guidelines?
We are in the process. We are holding the election on 22nd of October, and all the people who, as per the Supreme Court orders or the Supreme Court mandated constitution, disqualify will stand outside.
There are public office holders who are still associated with regional state cricket committees, units?
Absolutely. You see, the day they hold the AGM to adopt the new constitution, they'll be out.
So are you saying that those who do not comply will be out of the BCCI cricket world?
There's no option. You see, it's a Supreme Court mandated constitution which has been handed out to us. We did not prepare it ourselves. It's the Supreme Court.
Tell me this very bluntly, how deep the muck ran inside BCCI?
What do you mean by how deep it ran? See, the players, if you followed cricket over the last 3 years, cricket playing ability of this country...
The impression with the public was that BCCI was functioning like a private kitty.
Well, it was a group of people who were dominating it. There's no doubt about that. But what I'm trying to say is that did not affect the quality of the cricket of this country. Over the last 3 years, if you'll see, the Indian team in all the 3 formats of the game, the Test match, the ODIs, the T20s, has performed exceedingly well. So whatever was happening in public about the administration of BCCI, it didn't affect cricket, and we ensured that team continued to be supported in whatever way.
When do you expect your job to be done here?
On the
BCCI administration, in terms of implementing the...
See, we have scheduled the election for 22nd of October this year, and that evening we finish our tenure. Because 22nd of October, a newly elected team will take over in the BCCI. After that, we have no place.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.